as you said, that let us have our own way. It's not the American approach, our way or the highway. And Mr. Bennett, it seems that even issues like climate change are being weaponized. I was recently reading that on the issue of electric vehicles, in the United States, they had given a tax rebate of $7,500 that if you buy an EV, electric vehicle. But since most of the electric vehicles have Chinese batteries, they have taken that away. So the environment of the US will suffer, climate change issues will suffer because of their animus towards China. So that seems to be an approach like cutting your nose to spite your face, even on an issue like a global threat like climate change. Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. We see the things that you've referred to in the United States. The European Union is making similar moves. Recently, just this week, the newspaper, the Daily Telegraph in Britain, reported that there were proposals under consideration for the United Kingdom to bring in sanctions against Chinese electric vehicles on the grounds that they were supposedly flooding the market in Britain. And I think this is really quite extraordinary. It's really a kind of end of empire death wish, if you like. The kind of thing that you see, the kind of self-destructive things that you see of empires going back in history to the Roman Empire as they reach their end. If the climate issue should tell us one thing, it should tell us that there are huge problems and of course also huge opportunities, but huge existential problems facing humanity that affect every single country in the world without exception. We saw this to some extent with COVID, but issues of zoonotic pandemics, climate catastrophe, nuclear war, and so on. These are issues that can't be solved by any one country alone. They can only be solved by countries working together. But the United States and Britain, by and large, are not taking this attitude. They still have this winner takes all, beggar my neighbor approach. We saw it with their use of vaccine diplomacy, and we're seeing it with their completely irresponsible attitude to the huge threat of climate catastrophe. And climate catastrophe is not going to spare the United States. We've seen extreme weather conditions across the United States. We see that California, the Sunshine State, is already facing severe environmental and meteorological problems as a result of climate change. And I think this really goes to the crux of two different ways of looking at the world. There's the my way or the highway, winner takes all of the United States, which is not only failing the countries that the developed world pledged to help at repeated COP meetings, it's failing their own country and their own people. And I think we have to contrast this to what President Xi Jinping is putting forward about a shared future for humanity. And this, I think, in the West, to the extent it's commented on, some people might just try to dismiss it as a slogan or a soundbite. But it's not. It's a real practical program. It's not only a practical problem. I would say it's a practical necessity that a community of a shared future for humanity, which President Xi is proposing, is not something that's simply desirable. It's actually essential if we as a species are going to continue meet the challenges that all of humanity is facing now.
Yes, Mr. Tengen, and I was also seeing this report of the US intelligence community. It's called the Annual Threat Assessment, and they devoted a largest number of pages to China, the so-called Chinese threat containment of China. So it seems the US strategic culture is still based on that old view of the 19th century, the Monroe Doctrine, spheres of influence, hegemony, ensuring your own diktat, and in search of enemies. How do you view that, Mr. Tengen?
Well, absolutely true. I mean, we saw that in the 70s, what they did to Japan. Remember that in 1986, Japan signed the Plaza Accord, In today's dollar terms, Japan's economy is worth less today than it was in 1986 when it was in essence forced to sign that. Everything that the US is saying about China today was said about Japan. You had members of Congress and Senate bashing Toshiba radios and Toyota and Honda cars. And it's just this sense in America that no one can be trusted and only America should be in control. This was a kind of post-World War II mentality where they said, we can't trust the Europeans, they always get us into trouble. We can't trust the rest of the world because we're basically racist. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be in charge of everything, and we're going to take whatever we need in order to finance that. And basically, they became an economic colonial power. The U.S., really has this sense that it is anointed. And this was positioning the U.S. for being morally right, also biblically right. And therefore, there's no arguing. Truthfully, the Chinese prefer somebody like Kissinger because he deals in real power facts. You can make a deal with somebody like that. You might not like it. You might not like what they're doing, but you can arrive at some sort of conclusion. When you're arguing with somebody who believes that they're right and you're wrong, there's nothing you can do. And China is now stuck in what they call the philosophical prisoner's dilemma. You have an overwhelmingly powerful, militarily powerful nation, which is routinely threatening you, forming alliances against you, making it clear they're looking for an opportunity to have one of their minions attack you and try to weaken you and prevent you from rising economically. This is the old playbook that we've always used, but it isn't working. I mean, the difference between the 70s and today is that China, over the last 8 years, has been rising at an average rate of 6.5%. The US has been rising at 2%. And this is really the crux of what that worries America, is that it is losing, that it's losing its edge. They're fearful that China represents the kind of example that will push other nations to not only speak out, but to take action. This is really what frightens both Europe and America, that you'll have consortiums of countries coming together and not begging anymore, but saying, this is the way the price is going to be. And this is really at the crux of China's rise. It's not just China itself as a competitor. It's what China represents. It's what the Middle East represented with OPEC. And this is really, truly frightening because it would oversee the transfer back of the wealth that was stolen. We only have to look at what is now called India to understand that when the British arrived, that area was 24% of the world's GDP. When they left, it was 4%. So clearly, there needs to be changes. But clearly, those countries that benefited from their colonial past don't want to recognize that.
I think that's the key thing, that it's the fear of China is not just based on China's peaceful rise, but it's also what, as you said rightly, Mr. Tengen, that what China represents today. And I was recently reading this report of the Harvard University by Professor Graham Allison. It's called The Great Tech Rivalry, China versus the United States, where he says China is overtaking the United States in high-tech manufacturing, whether it's and the issues of artificial intelligence, 5G, robotics, cloud computing, STEM. So I think that a non-Western power rising peacefully is something which is not acceptable. And Mr. Member, that this Chinese path to development, which irks the United States, so it's not about public opinion or the interests of the people, it's about US interests, and they determine what are the interests of the recipient country. Mr. Member?
It's impossible to continue to live in a world where the interests of the United States reign supreme. What we have today is a choice between China and the United States. What we have today is a choice between a community being built with a shared future, a world that is being constructed with a shared future, or America first. Is that a choice? There's no choice there. What we have before us today is a choice between common security or American security. It's not simply a question of following China blindly, no. We fully agree with the path that the Chinese people are pursuing.